Hello, my name is Matthew, and last night I read The Adventure of a Scandal in Bohemia by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and it's great. This is the story that has the famous Irene Adler, the only woman who was able to outwit the great Sherlock Holmes. And it begins with Watson, now married and no longer at Sherlock's service. And he just happens to be walking down the street one day and looks up um, at their apartment window and sees Sherlock pacing back and forth, and he has his hands clasped between behind his back. And Watson decides just to pop in and say hello to his old friend, and it begins one of my favorite scenes that recurs through all of the Holmes stories, which is the introduction to Sherlock and a little example of his deduction and reasoning powers. And so Watson goes into the apartment, and Sherlock is just lounging around. And just like what Sherlock always does, he goes, "Oh, a few days ago you must have been caught out in the rain, and your housemaid didn't do a very good job doing something or other." And Watson goes, "This is unbelievable. All of my clothes are dry. How could you know I was caught out in the rain 2 days ago?" And so what Sherlock says, "Well, you have these notches on the bottoms of your shoes, and you have this and that, and when you put it all together, it's really quite obvious." And Watson always kind of says, "Well, when you explain it like that, it sounds obvious, but it's not really." And Sherlock describes the difference between observing and seeing, and he says, "You've walked up and down these stairs through all of these years. Can you tell me how many steps comprise the stairs?" And Watson goes, "Well, I don't know." And Holmes goes, "Aha! You see, but you don't observe. We have 17 steps. So there you go." And I love those kind of scenes. But Sherlock says, "I just got this letter, and there's a case, and Watson, I want you to come along and help me." And Watson agrees. So a little while later, there's a knock at the door, and this gigantic man comes in, and he's gonna be the beginning of the case. And he's from Bohemia. And he sits down and he says, "I'm a Bohemian, this and that." And Holmes, of course, is sort of like lounging and yawning and not really paying attention to this person. And the big Bohemian is kind of taken aback that this is supposed to be the great Sherlock Holmes. And finally, the Bohemian has his own little reveal. And he goes, "I'm not just a Bohemian, I'm the king of Bohemia." And Sherlock just sort of yawns and goes, "Well, I already knew that." And then explains, like, "With this and that, I could tell that you weren't just a regular old Bohemian, but you must have been the king of Bohemia." I love those things. So, the case is that the king of Bohemia got himself um, in a compromising situation with another woman while he's set to be married. And there's great. Um, so the king of Bohemia got tied up with Irene Adler, and the king wants to make sure um, that she can't ruin the marriage, and he's saying that she has evidence against the king. And this is the exchange. It's just great. Um, let's see. "How is she to prove their authenticity? There's the writing. Pooh pooh, forgery. My private notebook, stolen. My own seal, imitated. My photograph, bought. We were both in the photograph. Oh dear," this is Sherlock. "Oh dear, that is very bad. Your Majesty has indeed committed an indiscretion." So Sherlock now has to get the photograph, and apparently There's been other people that have broken into Irene Adler's apartment and can't find it, and they've done other things. And so Sherlock says, after the king leaves, he's talking to Watson, he says, I'll get the photograph. And Watson, of course, how on earth are you going to get the photograph? So Sherlock goes, I have to go. And it also has all these great disguises. Sherlock likes to be a master of disguise, and he puts on like a hobo outfit, or I can't remember. He puts on some disguise and goes off on the street, follows Irene Adler to this church. She happens to be getting married. Sherlock walks in, somehow becomes the witness of the marriage, and then leaves again. Goes back to Baker Street, talking to Watson. He goes, all right, here's the plan. And they go on and talk, and this is exactly what we're going to do. And so Sherlock puts on a different disguise. They go off again. Sherlock, like, somehow pretends to be injured, gets carried off into Irene Adler's apartment. Watson is in wait with a smoke bomb, and he throws it through the open window, and it like bursts into smoke. Everybody starts screaming fire, and then everybody runs away. So now Sherlock and Watson are back in the apartment, and Watson was sort of like, well, that's great, but what did we learn? And Sherlock goes, well, we've learned everything. I know exactly where the photograph is. And so the king comes back, and he goes, tomorrow we're going to go over there, because since I threw the smoke bomb, she was going to run to her most valuable possession, which is the photograph, and there must be a sliding panel on a wall. And so when they go over there and they open up the thing, the house looks like it's as if it's been ransacked already, and there's a letter from Irene Adler to Sherlock explaining how she figured out what was going on. And so that's the story of how Irene Adler tricked or outwitted Sherlock Holmes. And like, the case itself doesn't really make very much sense, but it is just so fun to see Sherlock doing his thing, Watson watching him, not really understanding but trusting and admiring his prowess, and it's really hard. It's just so hard to read one of these stories with a straight face. I mean, you have to be smiling. So yeah, it's what is it? The Adventure of a Scandal in Bohemia by Sir Conan Arthur Doyle. It's a great Sherlock Holmes story. Let me know if you've read it. Let me know if you have a favorite Sherlock Holmes story. I just love it. And thank you for watching.